super important discussion on school choice. Now, our goal was to get everyone together to cut through some of the rumors and some of the misinformation. I think on both sides. I'm Chris Tapia. This is Blake Barlam down there handling the camera. We are with Merge Mississippi. We are a grassroots offset affiliate of the Conservative Coalition of Mississippi here in the Magnolia State. And our goal is simply to bring voices and communities together through podcasts. We do social media. We are planning a bunch of events like this throughout the year to help mobilize voters in communities to help defend core values like faith, family, and freedom, which are our three big points that we like to push. We do that through some policy reform. We have a PAC through the Conservative Coalition of Mississippi as well. And one of the things that we saw through this legislative session is the school choice debate, which is hot on both sides, but educational freedom and parental rights is super important to us. So tonight's event is going to be a moderated Q&A style panel focused on this important issue. And I think more importantly, it's Mississippi families. So we've gathered these very influential voices. We had to have a few that had to bail on us last minute, but that's okay. We still have a wonderful group of people up here representing both sides of the discussion. So thank y'all again for joining us. Whether you support expanding options like ESAs for special needs students and beyond, or you have concerns about school choice, we hope this conversation helps answer some questions. Now, that being said, welcome to the biggest panel of the year I think I've seen some one-on-ones, but we wanted to have as many people. I think I reached out to over 200 people, both for and against, and we were able to get these 7 fine folks to join us. So it's obviously something that's kind of difficult to talk about. But this is also going to be broadcasted live on our Merge Mississippi YouTube page with hosts over 30,000 subscribers, so it will be viewed, and as well as our Conservative Coalition page, and also email to all of our base as well. Again, this format is going to be kind of a round-robin type discussion. All panels are going to have an opportunity to answer some questions, 14 questions to be exact. I've sent them the questions ahead of time so they can kind of prepare for that. So we'd like to focus on the key points. We'd like to focus on evidence, no super long stories. And I have a little bell on my phone. There's an app for that. That's going to help us move along and keep things in order. Again, the panelists have prepared some tight responses, so we look forward to a high-energy, evidence-driven conversation. And again, our goal is to answer some misconceptions. We're going to weigh some of the real advantages. We're also going to talk about some of the disadvantages. But our main focus, again, is how this impacts Mississippi children and Mississippi families. So we're going to start with some introductions real quick. We're going to go from my right to left, starting down there with Miss Leah. And she's just going to introduce herself, pass the mic down, and then just give us just a one-sentence quick connection to your stance on school choice and why you're here.
My name is Leah Ferretti, and thank y'all so much for coming out tonight. I am the director of Mississippi Ready, the parent voice for parent choice. And in that description, I'm obviously very for school choice because it saved my family. And there was a time in our life where we didn't have a choice. And thank goodness for an ESA because we were able to access it. It saved my family, and I'd love to tell y'all some more about it.
I'm Lindsay Beckham. I'm with the organization Moms for Liberty, which advocates for parental rights, and especially in education. But more than anything else, I'm a mom of 5 very special yet very unique and individual children. And I just know that education freedom is much needed here in Mississippi.
My name is Russel. I run Magnolia Tribune. I want to ask just 3 quick questions, raise your hand questions, for both of the panelists and of the audience. Raise your hand if you agree that the purpose of paying taxes to support education is to prepare kids for life. Raise your hand if you agree that not every single time the school where a kid happens to live close to is the very best option for that kid. No hand raising on the other side. Raise your hand if you believe that parents and not government should have the ultimate decision rights over how their kids are raised. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Gerard Gibert. I am the host of Middays with Gerard, Super Talk Mississippi, 10 to 1, Monday through Friday. That is actually my second career. Prior to that, I founded Venture Technologies, a solutions provider and cloud services provider. In 1986, I sold that company in 2019. I have been involved in the school choice issue as a strong advocate for education freedom since 2014. That is when Grant Callen, the founder of Empower Mississippi, approached me in 2014 about serving as the organization's board chairman, a position I held for 10 years. I stepped down in 2024. I still remain on the board, but we rotated the chairman of the board, and I have invested a significant amount of my personal time and my dollars in advocating for education freedom in Mississippi.
Good afternoon. My name is Darian Span. I'm to my 22nd year in education. I'm currently serving as president of the Mississippi Association of Educators. And I'm here to talk about school vouchers because wording matters. And so while I didn't raise my hand on any of the questions, I had no reflection on whether I believe that or not. But I am against school vouchers.
Hello, I am Nancy Loon, Executive Director of the Parents Campaign, a network of more than 65,000 Mississippians who advocate for strong public schools for all Mississippi children. I want to read you right quick what former State Superintendent and IHL Commissioner Hank Bounds had to say about our work. I quote, "There is no organization that has done more to advocate for students, parents, and teachers. I believe that in the absence of the Parents Campaign's focus on ensuring that teachers received appropriate resources, it would have been very difficult for Mississippi to have shown such dramatic academic growth over the last decade. I am certain that the campaign's work has resulted in more students being college and career ready." Thank you, Hank.
Good evening. I'm Jamie Creel. I'm a 26-year educator, business owner now. And just a quick question to everybody in the audience. I didn't raise my hand for the same reasons Darian didn't. It's not that I'm against anything. When we send legislators to the Capitol in Jackson, do you expect them to balance the budget? Raise your hand. Fair enough. So if we couldn't balance the budget last year, and it cost us $100,000 a day, we institute this universal school choice at $350 million a day one. How do you expect them to balance that? Here you go.
Well, Mr. Jamie, you can hang on to it. We'll start down there with you and we'll work our way back. Thank you all for that. So we'll start with some common misconception questions on school choice. And again, we'll give y'all 30 to 45 seconds to answer the question. If you hear the bell, you've gone a little too long. But I will also try to keep us moving as quickly as possible so we are gracious of everybody's time. So starting with question number one, the most persistent myth is that school choice drains money from public schools, yet studies show participating students often cost less and public schools can improve under competition. Do you believe it drains resources?
Well, my biggest issue with that, Josh, there are fixed, if you've ever been in the public school system, there's fixed expenditures. And that's where the rubber meets the road. You have to make notes on buildings, electricity bills, and things of that nature. Whenever the population starts fluctuating, whereas if you give them vouchers to go to another school, or you give them the options to go to private school, whatever the case may be, and that school were to lose funding, the expenditures could not be met based on the amount of money that's being given, if that makes sense. So from the fixed assets and things of that nature, it just doesn't simply work. The biggest problem I have in all the funding issues, in October, they go in and they do the head count. Oh, gosh.
Go ahead. He's been.
In October, they go in and they do an ADA head count of the monies that school will receive for the next year. Okay, well, in February, a teacher has to put their intent in to be a teacher at that school for the next year. And then in April, March, they're passing out contracts. The school choice component, there needs to be a schedule put out that would solidify this broken thing that we have. I mean, you can't give monies in October of the previous year and sell it. I mean, if we, and I do believe we're going to go to some type of school choice at some point in time. I'm not dumb, okay? But there needs to be some things worked out with the calendar, in my opinion, when it comes to expenditures and fixed assets.
Thanks, sir. Ms. Nancy?
Well, Jamie made a great point about fixed cost. Here's the other thing you need to understand. School choice does not give the choice to parents. School choice legislation is not written to benefit parents. It is not written to benefit students. School choice legislation, including House Bill 2 that was introduced this year, is written to benefit private schools. It gives the entire final choice to private schools. Our primary point is that all schools that receive state funding should be open to all students and should be held to the very same rules. Let's have a level playing field and all operate under the same rules and be open to all students.
Thank you, Mr. Darian.
Thank you. Yes, I think it drains resources from an already strapped budget, right? Unless legislators can tell me that the $7 billion or so budget that Mississippi works with is inaccurate, then yes, it surely drains the budget. Public schools have always been able to produce more with little. At some point, public schools stop expecting from the state, yet continuing to do what is best for all students. A prime example of this is articles have been posted at this juncture in the state legislature that an amount of pay raise for teachers will be based on what's left. Yet we are saying we have enough funds to pass a voucher bill. Apparently still saying we do, as it is alleged that the governor is considering a special session board. We have seen these programs in other states bloom out of control to numbers that lead to hard cuts in other areas of the state budget.
Thank you, sir. For Mr. Gerard, same question. Persistent myth is that school choice drains money from public schools. Do you believe that?
Well, I like that you termed it as a myth, because it is. The reality is, if tomorrow every student enrolled in a private school, and last I checked in the state of Mississippi, that's about 50,000. If every student disenrolled in the private schools in the state of Mississippi shuttered, the state of Mississippi would be required to educate those children. You talk about busting a budget. Schools couldn't accommodate that, yet they would be required to by law. The reality is the fact that we even have private schools has been baked into the budgetary model for decades. And the state of Mississippi literally creates the budget for public schools based on the assumption that the kids enrolled in private schools aren't going to change and go enroll in the public schools. I think it's also disingenuous to assume that there would just be this mass exodus from the public schools if school choice were implemented, which would leave public schools grossly underfunded. And I can probably guess that my friend sitting next to me, Russel, Latino, is going to remind everybody that we've actually significantly increased public school funding over the last few years. And right now, the state of Mississippi legislature is considering pretty significant teacher pay raises to the tune of about $350 million a year. So I don't see any intent or any desire on the part of the legislature to leave the public schools hanging with limited funds. I certainly understand the concept of fixed cost. I have degrees in accounting and economics. I get that.
Yeah, so we've increased education spending by nearly $1 billion in the last 6 years. That includes a $250 million teacher pay raise that occurred in 2022 and a $300 to $350 million teacher pay raise that's being considered right now. The notion that we're underfunding public schools is ridiculous, particularly when you consider that there are 60,000 fewer kids in K-12 today than there were 10 years ago. So we are spending considerably more money for considerably fewer students. The notion of underfunding just isn't matched with the statistics. The bill that was proposed, since we're going to get specific, would not have drained the treasury in any way. We were talking about 6,250 ESAs for kids that are currently in public schools. That actually would be a savings to the state because the local money would stay in the school. It wouldn't follow the kid. Only the state allotment would have followed the kid. The other 6,250 scholarships are going to be open to anybody. The cost of that was $43 million. So you compare $43 million for essentially what's a pilot program for ESAs to $1 billion in increased K-12 education funding for 60,000 fewer students. Those are the facts.
Absolutely. And I hate it when I hear tax dollars or public dollars, because whose dollars are those? They're the people who pay the taxes. They're my dollars. They're your dollars. And parents deserve the option to use their dollars in the way that they best see fit to educate their child. Russ, you are so right. 60,000 less students in the last 10 years, yet an increase in how we fund education by the legislature. The appropriations that they have made have gone from $3.427 billion to $5.216 billion, again, with a 60,000 decrease in students. Now, Russ, you talked about the teacher pay raise that happened a few years ago. What you failed to mention is that that pay raise also included that teachers get a raise every single year and an even more significant raise after every 5 years. So to say that we are not making sure that our teachers are paid is just ridiculous. We absolutely do. And let's not forget that we still have children who cannot read on grade level, even with all of the increases and the amount of money that we send to the public schools in the past 10 years.
Very well said. So ultimately, we should be funding children, not institutions. Raise your hand if you are a teacher or a former teacher. Money doesn't go to the classroom. Money doesn't go to the students. When I packed up my classroom, I got my husband to bring a U-Haul. He came in, he's like, wait a second. Because I owned everything in that room except the paint on the walls, and I probably owned the paint because I probably paid for the paint to paint my classroom. Money is not going to our teachers. It's staying in that central office. It's not going to our students to give them the resources that they need. It's staying in that central office. And I think we can all agree that's not okay.
All right, Ms. Leah, you can keep the mic. We're going to start the second question here. Critics claim school choice only helps wealthy families already in private school, but participation is highest among the low income and special needs students. Is this myth dead, or do you have any counter evidence it's mainly a subsidy for the rich?
I agree with that, that it's not for the wealthy. This is for working class families. These are for families that are at their dining room table making decisions between having to pay for certain therapies that insurance doesn't cover or paying the light bill. Families are making those real decisions, and we should not be putting those hardships on them. Education freedom gives accessibility, affordability, and opportunity to our families, and that's what we should be doing in America. That's what we should be doing in Mississippi, is we should be lifting those barriers and giving opportunity for every child, because every child deserves that opportunity.
Absolutely, Leah. And President Trump and his administration have called school choice the civil rights issue of our day, because every single child deserves to be educated in the best environment for them, regardless of their zip code, regardless of their color of skin, regardless of their socioeconomic status. And who best knows how a child learns and what best environment that they need to be in order for them to learn in the way that fits their unique and individual needs? The parents do. And it is time that we put parents back into the driver's seat concerning our kids' education. And you know what? The Supreme Court agrees with me, because there is a 100-year-old Supreme Court case called Pierce versus the Society of Sisters, and it states the child is not for the state to raise, yet it is the fundamental right of the parent to raise their child and bring their child up in the way they see fit. Let's give those decisions back to parents.
So I asked those initial three questions for a reason, because if you believe that the reason to spend tax money on the kid is to prepare them for life, if you believe that 100% of the time the school closest to where they live is not the best school for the kid, and you believe parents should have those choices, then really what we're not debating whether or not there should be school choice. We're debating what it looks like. We're debating design at that point. And I think it's important. So the criticism that it would only help rich people is pretty ridiculous when you consider the fact that right now the wealthy people are the ones that have access to private schools, right? It's not everybody. It's also ridiculous when you look at the design of like HB2, which had a low-income preference for kids to get scholarships first. So right now, you already have kids who are being excluded because they can't afford it. This was a means to allow kids to afford it. I'll tell you my personal story really quickly. I was born at a charity hospital. I went through public K-12 my entire academic career. My wife did too. I've got 3 teachers in my family that all teach in Mississippi public schools. Both of my kids are in Mississippi public schools. This is not an anti-public school thing. But people like Ms. Loon, whose parents decided to send her to private school, thought that that was the best option for her. And I just think poor kids should have the same chance.
So this notion that it only helps the wealthy is a bit misguided, and here's why. It's actually the more affluent in our society that shoulder the lion's share of the cost of public education. They pay more income tax, they pay more sales tax, generally speaking, because they consume more. That goes to the general fund budget in the state, and that is used to fund what amounts to about 53% of the state budget, and that's all educational services. They also typically have more expensive property, and they pay more property taxes, and that funds the local portion of a student's allocation, and they don't use the public schools. They're literally subsidizing the public schools. I'm one of them. Now, my daughter's here tonight. Not only did she and her brother attend and graduate from public schools, she taught in the public schools for 8 years. So the wealthy aren't just the ones that benefit here. I believe in this policy because I want my tax dollars to be optimized and maximized. And I believe education freedom achieves that. If I told you how much I just paid in property taxes in January for my property, it's more than some people make. I'm not bragging about that. I'm just saying that for that cost, of which about 50%, 60% is for my local school district, I want the best outcomes.
Sir. All right, Mr. Darren, said question. Some of the critics claim that school choice only helps wealthy families. Do you believe that or not?
Well, I definitely disagree with that. School choice is the civil rights era of our time. That's absurd. But I will say, I guess this determines who is doing the talking, because research in states like Arizona, New Hampshire, and Wisconsin showed that 75 to 90% of school vouchers users were students already enrolled in private schools before voucher programs were implemented. So whether you're rich or not, if you have an opportunity to use additional funds, then you subtracting that from your own bank account, whether you're rich or not.
So yes, what Darian said is absolutely true. And the truth is that the only state that had a high participation rate from low-income students are states that specifically prohibit participation by wealthy parents in their voucher program. For all other states, for universal programs like what was introduced in Mississippi's legislature, here are the data from those school choice states. Arizona, families in the wealthiest 10% of the population participated at 5 times the rate of those in the poorest 10%. Arkansas, first year of the program, 95% of voucher users were already in private schools before the voucher legislation passed. Year 2 of the program, 88% of voucher users were already in private schools before the voucher legislation passed. They're in year 3 now, so we don't have that data. Iowa, the majority of voucher participants were already enrolled in private schools. Florida, the majority of voucher participants were already enrolled in private schools. Ohio, when income limits were removed, the majority of participants skewed toward the wealthiest families in the state. A Princeton study found that when states pass universal programs or expand eligibility, private schools tend to raise their tuition by as much as 25%. Because they already have the students they want. And they use things like raising tuition to keep out the students they don't want.
Ready?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so when you look at this in theory, it seems like a great idea. You're gonna give this money to low-income families, okay? What does a low-income family look like in Mississippi? Well, if you're an educator, you know. If single parent, multiple kids, we're going to offer vouchers to these people, and I get it, they need help. But if that single parent, how is that single parent going to drive their child 45 minutes one way when they can't even get them on the freaking bus at 8 a.m. That doesn't work. And all this is an introductory or basically a gateway drug into the universal school choice, which is going to cost us substantially. Okay, that's all it is. But to offer it to low-income kids, what that's, knowing nobody's going to take it, then they're going to offer it to more and more people, and they're going to be sitting there with unused vouchers, and we can talk about who's going to oversee the money later on in some of this debate. But when you start looking at what the low-income families look like, and how do we get those kids in better academic situations, what's a kid in Issaquena going to do? They don't have any schools, public or private, in Issaquena. Where are you going to send them? You can't send them to Yazoo County. You can't send them to Vicksburg. You can't send them to South Delta. Where are you going to send those kids? You going to make them drive 2.5 hours? We need to have a plan, people.
All right, Mr. James, you're going to keep the mic for our next question. A common accusation is that private schools and choice programs have zero accountability. Every major program requires audits, parental reporting, and often testing. Is this accountability meaningless, and why hasn't fraud or failure been widespread in some more mature programs?
Well, I've taught in both the public and the private schools, and I see benefits. I can tell you one of the big issues with public school teachers right now is they're daggone tired of teaching to the test. Okay, I can tell you that. When you don't have accountability and you can teach the holistic part of the child, then you're going to have growth. They can get out there, they can learn to play kickball again, they can do all types of things. These teachers in the public schools, all they do right now is basically, they're so mandated to teach to the test and they get locked in on it. There's no way that you can send public funds to private schools with no accountability without relieving it from the public school side. You can't have accountability on one end and not have accountability on the other end. It doesn't make any sense. I don't understand it, and nobody ever taught me into it. So if you're going to send public dollars to private schools, they need to have the same accountability as the public school teachers do. Let's give everybody a fighting chance.
So who can tell me what skills a sixth grader needs to master to be considered proficient in English language arts and math? Anybody? That's been the response every single time I've asked that question. Well, you're a teacher. So, so we rely on our teachers to help us understand that. The truth is, most parents do want what's best for their children, but they are not education experts, and they shouldn't have to be. Parents deserve to know how the quality of education being provided in their private schools compares to the quality of education being provided in their public schools, an apples to apples comparison. And the only way to know that is for them to take the same assessments and to make that information public. Information that the voucher lobby has worked night and day to keep you from getting. They don't want you to have it. The idea that accountability is allowing a parent to leave if they're not happy is ridiculous. What accountability means is providing evidence that you are doing what you claim to be doing. And the only way for us to know that and how well the private schools compare to the public schools is for them to take the very same assessments and make that public.
For the last 7 years, I worked as a high school administrator in Starkville. So I will say, to your point, Jamie, that after spring break, it is known as testing season. And that lasts from the end of March until the end of May after testing is done. So just think about that for public school teachers and what they're doing. Instead of teaching, they're teaching to the test and preparing the kids because they do want to make sure that their school or school district is a high rating, right? But there are private schools that are doing tremendous work and graduating young people who go on to do great work. Those young people are living the American dream, in part due to their education from their institution. To say the accountability they provide is meaningless is absurd. What I will say is they are not held accountable to the entity that provides the funding, i.e. state testing. Public schools have all those same accountabilities that the private school that you mentioned above, in addition to everything else that is required by the state. It is an unfair playing field.
So there's no doubt in my mind that the market, consumers are a superior regulator to government every day, all day. And in fact, it's what has allowed this country to prosper and to be the most affluent on the planet. The litmus test for an education is not test scores. It's not even grades in the classroom. It's your success professionally and personally as an adult. That should be the track record that all schools provide. Not just test scores, not just reading gates, not just grades of schools. That's not contributing to society. When one graduates and goes to work, hopefully becomes married, raises a family, and contributes to society, that's the litmus test. Private schools can provide that information. Public schools should provide that information. That's the resume that they should deliver to parents. Parents understand if a school's not working for their child. They don't need to be education experts for that. But to know whether or not a school is performing is to know how its graduates perform once they enter their professional and personal life.
So I want to push back on something, the notion that this is a program for wealthy kids. Once again, in Florida, since that was used as an example, there are 286,000 kids in their ESA tax credit scholarship program. Over 100,000 of them qualify for free and reduced lunch. 54% of them were African-American or Hispanic. 36% live in a single-parent household, and there are 2,278 private schools participating in that program. So I don't know where the statistics before came from, but this is coming from the Florida Department of Education. The other thing I'd say really quickly is, I don't know how to replace a carburetor in my car, but I know my car's not running right. Parents know when things aren't working well for their kids. What we see in school choice states is overwhelming parent satisfaction once they take part in the system. The accountability in HB2, national norm reference test, which public schools use too. There were audits in that bill for how these scholarships were being used. But I want to point out one thing really quickly too, as we talk about accountability. Because what we heard was some of the accountability standards on public schools maybe are too onerous, or that they think they're too onerous. And their answer is we want to impose these on the private schools as well to make them duplicates. The whole point of the school choice program is to give families a different type of environment. What we see in MAI schools, by the way, is ACT scores that are 3 points higher, which is significant on a 36-point test. The last thing I'd say really quickly is there are 32 school districts in Mississippi that have not satisfied their statutory audit requirements. 13 of them have not satisfied their statutory audit requirements in the last 3 years. So you want to talk about accountability, let's talk about it across the board.
I love the accountability question because, again, who should schools be accountable to? I believe the parents, because who cares about these children more than anyone else? It's absolutely the parents. Russ, you're so right. These audits, we're coming up on year 3 now, and we still have public schools. And by the way, they get 9 months to do so. And if you've been watching the news in the last week or so, you've seen that the Mississippi Department of Education is now even making exceptions on these audits because they can't get their act together. Where's the accountability here? Not only that, but this is the 8th year in a row that we have seen ACT scores declining from public school students. Again, where's the accountability? You have less students, you have more money. Why are test scores going down? Now, again, the audits are a big problem, but also we have a school district right here in Mississippi who can't even make payroll. And then let's talk about some of the other things that have happened. Superintendents who have pled guilty to embezzlement. A school board member who has defended a child predator and is still sitting on the board over in DeSoto County. Wilkinson County was recently taken over by the state for the 2nd time. Then in Corinth, we have got the superintendent or the principal is being indicted because there is child porn being created with AI of middle school students. Again, where is the accountability?
Parents are the closest and most consistent form of accountability for their children. My children were in a public school that wasn't helping them. Where was the accountability there? It laid at my feet. It laid at my feet. So I had to make another choice for my family because I am accountable for them. I put them in a private school. I'm a graduate of a private school. And there was a season that they served my children best. And where was the accountability? On me in making the choice to be able to send them there. On their norm reference tests that they took yearly, just like every other private school does. That's where accountability lies. And I agree with Jamie. We should absolutely lighten up on some of those restrictions in our classroom. Today, my children are in a public school, and I promise you, they are tested to death. Every quarter, there's another norm reference test every year. And like they said earlier, this is testing season. So your teachers have from day one until spring break to teach a year's worth of content and then test on it. So I think we need to do better by them. And when you think about accountability, absolutely, it lies at my feet.
Obviously, you can keep the mic for our next question. Homeschooling is often criticized as producing socially awkward, isolated kids missing real-world interactions. Yet studies show higher civic engagement, tolerance, and diverse socialization via co-ops and sports. Does the socialization myth hold up, or does evidence prove homeschool kids are better prepared for relationships with adults as well as academically?
I think that stereotype is completely outdated. And, when we went through COVID, everybody had to homeschool, right? Whether you wanted to or not. And because of that, more families chose to homeschool because they saw like, hey, this works better for my family. Or, hey, I don't like what I'm seeing or what that my children are or not learning during this time of uncertainty. Homeschoolers are absolute, man, look at Tim Tebow. I mean, unfortunately, we can't allow homeschool students to participate in high school activities and sports because I guess we don't like Tim Tebow around here. But homeschool families, the accountability, like we talked about earlier, lies at your feet. And homeschoolers, man, I tell you what, there's some great learners and families are able to innovate and meet their children where they are, whether it's their pacing, the curriculum that they're teaching, because parents know what their children need.
Absolutely, I completely agree, Leah. And, there have been times in my children's education that I have pulled them out and homeschooled them because of things happening that I didn't agree with. I was not a proponent of the mask mandates. In fact, I fought back hard against that at the school board level. Got labeled a domestic terrorist for that. I wear that proudly because I care about my children and I know what's best for them. I agree that we should absolutely allow our homeschool children to play in public school sports. Why would we deny them that option? Something that was said on the other side of the table earlier, words matter. Words absolutely do matter. And that's why I think there's a big difference that many people recognize between a voucher and an ESA. An ESA is what we are advocating for here in Mississippi. A voucher is when the government pays a school. An ESA is when the government gives that money to the family to choose how they educate their child. What I love about this is you could almost have an a la carte type education for your child. You could homeschool in some areas, you can pick tutors, you can do the things that they are drawn to, and you can spend that money to best meet their needs with an ESA.
Who wrote these questions? I mean, honestly, I kind of feel like they're favoring this side of the table. Hopefully, eventually you grill us a little bit. So I'll moderate my comments a little bit. I think homeschooling works great for a lot of families. I was a youth pastor at one point in my life. I got to work with a lot of homeschool kids. They were well-adjusted, very social, very smart. The data out there shows that they score very well on testing, that they finish college at a higher rate than people that don't homeschool finish college. All those things are true. It's also true that it's not for everybody. And I want to emphasize that when we have a choice around a conversation around school choice, it's not one side, at least on our side, saying private schools are the be-all, end-all, or public schools are the be-all, end-all, or homeschooling is. It's the realization that every single kid is different. And because every single kid is different, parents have to assess what is in the best interest of their child, knowing their child, right? So for some, that's going to be homeschooling. For some, that's going to be private school. For some, that's going to be public school. Right now, we've got a system where only a certain crust of people can make those decisions. A mom that has a husband who's able to take care of the whole family so she can stay home and homeschool, right? Or parents are going to afford private school. The whole point here is not one size fits all. The whole point here is to recognize that every kid is different.
First, I wanted to say something about accountability real quick, and that is if the accountability systems that are implemented and utilized in the state of Mississippi and honestly across the country, there would be no F schools. There would be no F districts. There would be no failing kids. The purpose of accountability is to deter bad outcomes and prevent bad outcomes. We have bad outcomes. We have to acknowledge that. With respect to homeschooling, my personal experience with that is as a baseball coach of youth sports for about 25 years, highly competitive baseball, traveling around the region. I coached many kids that were homeschooled. I couldn't tell the difference. I also went from kids that were educated in a traditional education public school setting or private school. I also employed several employees that were educated in a homeschool environment. We didn't hire anybody that we had to stick in the closet and shove the work under the door to, I can assure you. So my experience was positive and couldn't tell the difference, honestly. I do think this is a misconception and a myth.
I'm staring, same question.
ESA vouchers, tomato, because parents get the ESA money. Is it going to private school? If it's not going to the private school, then it's going to their pockets. Now, as a high school administrator the last 7 years, I've seen homeschool students. So I want to continue to make it clear that parents have a choice. School choice is not anything that I'm against, right? We want parents to have a choice to send their child wherever they think is best. And so as an administrator, I saw several kids over the years come from homeschool, come into the public school and excel. And so, so just continue to make sure that they're doing what's best for their child.
So our concern with homeschooling isn't with children who are actually getting an education. There are plenty of homeschool parents who do a great job. The issue is that in Mississippi, homeschooling has no regulation at all. We have compulsory school laws because it's really important for all children to get an education. But for parents who want to homeschool, all they have to do is fill out this little short form, name, address, and then there's a line where they put their education plan, and it can be one word, homeschool, and nobody checks on it. And what social workers tell us is that in a lot of the neglect cases that they see, child neglect cases that they see, these are children who are supposedly being homeschooled, but they have received no education at all for years. And so this is our concern, and public school teachers tell us that they know the kids that are pulled from their classrooms to be homeschooled, supposedly, very often are children with severe disciplinary issues or those who have been chronically absent, and the parents get tired of dealing with it. And so it's just easier for them to pull their kids out, and the kids just sit at home or roam the streets. And that is child neglect. That is our concern, not with the ones who are getting a good education.
Mr. Moderator, before you start my time, Russ, I agree with you 100%. When I read these questions this morning, I was like, I'm walking into an ambush. And I was like, and then Chris Tapia is the moderator. I can think about Bad Boys too, when Johnny Tapia is taking care of all the business back in the day. I'm like, I'm in an ambush here. But no, this has been great. And this is what I love about having community forums like this. You know, we can have differences of opinions. And I can assure you when this is over, just like we always do, Leah and I are going to hug it out because that's what we need to do. The problem with this country today is the fact that we can't have conversations. And that's where we are right now. And that's sad. If you can't have a conversation with somebody and still respect them in the end when it's over, hey, shame on you. You know, and I mean that. Now, here's my opinion on homeschool. All right, my kids, and I have a disabled child. I have an autistic child who's 19 years old, okay? Everybody knows it. I don't hide from it, okay? I've moved, they've been in 4 different school districts, and that was my school choice. That's true. Now, I live 90 miles away from where I work, and I choose to stay where I am because that school is safe, okay? It provides a nurturing environment for my kids. They don't have to battle the sex, drugs, alcohol stuff that bigger schools have to, like when I was a principal of a 6A school. So I don't want them having to deal with that. The benefit of the homeschool deal, in my opinion, is kids are able to mature and they're able to make those decisions to shove those things away to better help their maturity down the road.
All right, Mr. Jamie, you can keep the mic for the next question. I'm gonna jump around a little bit. Looking at some disadvantages that we see, in rural Mississippi, most families lack nearby private schools and transportation. How does expanding ESA vouchers not just divert money from rural public schools while leaving those students with zero real choice?
Okay, if you've heard me on any of the radio stations, and look, I'm not throwing shade. I taught, Leah's husband was a student of mine back in the day. I taught in Vicksburg Warren School District for many, many years. The Mississippi Delta's in bad shape, and the whole western side of the state is in bad shape. We have to, before we can fix school vouchers, we have to fix the educational problem in the western part of our state, period. We have to send resources over there for public and private schools, and it has to be fixed. School vouchers do not work for kids living in Bolivar County, Issaquah, Sharkey, Warren, Adams, Wilkinson. It just doesn't work, and we have to fix that first. On top of the fact that 2 years ago, we had 2,300 teacher shortage in Mississippi. This year's 3,100. Okay, teachers are leaving the education by the droves because of the accountability. Okay, that's what the problem in the test scores are going down, because we're losing quality teachers. Why are we doing that? Why can't we entice teachers to get back in the educational game and make a difference in kids' lives?
Would you repeat your question, please?
Yes, ma'am. So in rural Mississippi, most families lack nearby private schools or transportation to get to them. How does the expanding of ESA or vouchers not just divert money from rural public schools while leaving those students with zero real choice?
Well, that's a really good point, and that is a challenge that in a lot of places they really would not have very many options. But the truth is that the option isn't with the parent anyway. The option is always with the private school. And we see that there are ways that private schools intentionally limit the choices that parents have. They don't provide transportation. Jamie mentioned that. How is a parent going to get the kid from home to school every day and back? There are relatively few families in Mississippi who can afford to do that. Private schools charge tuition above what the voucher provides. It's a way of keeping kids out. And then just not choosing them. The final choice is always with the private school. Listen, there was a private school leader who had this comment. I think this tells us what we need to know about how these vouchers really work. This Mississippi private school leader said, if the legislature passes vouchers, we will just raise our tuition to keep out the riffraff. That is how they think about our children in Mississippi. The ones that they don't want, they consider riffraff, and they intentionally leave them out. The choice does not belong to the parent.
I just think that this is the issue, when we give vouchers out to parents for school choice, and whether they go, if there are no private schools or nowhere to go in that area. I think it's incumbent upon the state, MDE, to provide support to those school districts so that they can do well. But one thing that I think would help in those areas, and I've mentioned this to legislators, is to look into community schools, and that's something that we can talk about at another time.
Well, I'm a little confused. If education choice has all of these hindrances, these impediments, these challenges associated with it, I thought the concern was that public schools in a public-to-public transfer would be inundated, and that private schools would say no, so what's the problem? It sounds like everybody would be stuck in the public school, same one they're in now, and receive that money. So on one hand, we're saying, well, gee, you really wouldn't have a choice, and you wouldn't have transportation, and you wouldn't be able to do this and that and the other, and you really can't do what you want. Well, it sounds like that everybody's stuck. So let's put the program in place and let it work. See what happens. I'd also say that while I perfectly acknowledge the transportation concern, that's legitimate. I'm a big believer of the private sector stepping up to assist with some of these challenges. I can see where we business people perhaps could get together and form a fund that would cover the cost of transportation for those who have an ESA that otherwise can't afford it. If we could get this done, I'll write a check for $1,000 tonight for that fund.
Yeah, so a few things. One, the average cost of private school in Mississippi is actually beneath what the ESA was going to be. It's close, but it's actually beneath what the private school is going to be. The other thing I'd say is that if you look at MAIS, which is the big association that's over private schools in Mississippi, what you would find is that there are actually more empty seats at private schools than there are filled seats. So there's plenty of capacity across Mississippi for kids who would want to take advantage of those schools. And candidly, MAIS changed their position on this because the schools that they represent came to them and said, hey, you guys have been opposed to this. We don't understand why we want to take these kids. So this notion that there wouldn't be anybody to take these kids, I think is silly based on what we know from these schools. I would also say, though, if we're going to disparage individual people for saying things like calling kids riffraff, that we should name them, right? Sometimes I'm a little bristly and abrasive to people. But if I'm going to say that someone said something like these kids are riffraff, I'm going to identify who that person is and not hide behind the anonymity of it. I've got a real problem with this notion that because there might be some growing pains or because there might be some challenges, we shouldn't give kids this option. If a building is burning down, in some cases for a lot of kids, the building is burning down, and you can only get in and save 5 and there are 10 kids in there, and you're a fireman, you don't say, you know what, I can't save all 10, so I'm gonna let 5 burn. You go in and you save the ones that you can. And that's what we're talking about.
And speaking of keeping the riff-raff out, I think that's an absurd comment in and of itself. But, when you have a public school and they have their policies, those don't change for students who transfer into that school. They still have to abide by the rules, and if they don't, they can't stay there. So there's not going to be any riff-raff, which I think that's absurd in the first place. Now, we heard about private schools just raising their tuition to keep the riff-raff out. We've seen in 2 states, private schools actually raise their tuitions. That's in Arizona and Florida. The reasons behind that were because the public schools gave raises to their public school teachers. Therefore, the private schools also had to compensate and pay their teachers more, which in turn made there have to be an increase in tuition. There are students in the state of Mississippi who want to transfer from one public school district to another. Now, the receiving public school district has agreed to accept them, but here's the problem. The school district they are leaving also has to agree to this. And why would they want to do that when they get so many dollars per head in that school? We are holding our children hostage in bad situations where they can be put into a better environment where they can learn in a better way.
So ESAs absolutely work in rural areas in Mississippi like Bolivar County because I lived in Bolivar County when my children had an ESA, and many of my students had an ESA also. So yes, ESAs will work for students in rural areas. And let me tell you how an ESA works, because I think our friends on the other side, I've heard it say, oh, if you give a parent a voucher, they're just going to put it in their pocket. That's not how it works. As a parent who received an ESA, this is how it works. You have to pay out of pocket up front. Then you submit quarterly reimbursement reports to NDE on the approved expenses that you spent your money out of pocket, all these education expenses, let's say in a private school. Let's say that your child received private therapies or needed some extra things because they weren't receiving it in their local public school, right? That money comes out of your pocket. and then you submit it and you are being reimbursed. Now, some of the reimbursements you may not receive. If someone at MDE decides, hey, that's not an approved expenditure. So to understand how the process works, that's how it works. You pay out of pocket, you submit a report quarterly to MDE, and then they reimburse you according to whatever approved expenditures are approved according to the ESA, such as curriculum, tuition, therapies. You know, a lot of therapies aren't covered under insurance, and a lot of therapies aren't received in a public school district. And a lot of private schools are providing those resources to families.
You can keep the mic for this next one, Ms. Leah. Some recent large voucher programs showed some of the biggest test score drops recorded. Does this prove choice can harm kids, or are early declines irrelevant versus the other benefits?
I think when you look at any type of achievement drop, you're looking at that when they're immediately transferring from their public school to a school of choice or a private school, because there's a learning game, there's learning gaps, and we have to make up those gaps in games. So that takes time. So it's not going to have immediate short outcomes. You're going to have to see it over time, because, I mean, if a child comes into school and is, let's say they're in 5th grade and they're on the 2nd grade reading level, they're not going to be reading on grade level overnight. The teachers are going to have some time to get the work done, to fill those gaps and get the children where they are.
You know, I believe that we can't afford not to implement more education freedom in the state of Mississippi. Of course, I also believe some of the reasoning behind that is because of COVID. Now, we saw a drop in reading and math scores across the entire country. It's basically a phenomenon that Mississippi did not have those drops, but also, you know what, because of that, it makes us look like we have done a whole lot better when it looks that way, because other states have declined. When you look at some states that spend the most per student, such as New York and New Jersey, they've had the most decline when it comes to their reading scores and their math scores. And who's to say that's not because they don't have an ESA or education freedom program in their state?
Yes, so the most robust school choice programs that have been around the longest are in Florida and Indiana. And I know we talk about the great gains that we've experienced in Mississippi, and they are very impressive. They are. That no one should take that away from public school teachers, from the work that the legislators did in terms of policy directive, all that. But Florida ranks third on math and reading in the 4th grade. They drop a little bit for 8th grade, but that's better than Mississippi, both for their 4th and 8th grade scores. Indiana actually is a little bit lower than Florida in 4th grade. I think they're 5th and 7th on reading and math, but they stay at 5th and 7th by the 8th grade. And so those are really robust programs that have been around for a long time. And the end result of that is that they're testing at a very, very high level. And what we see across the country is that where there's robust school choice programs, public schools actually improve. There's an argument to be made that what we did with charter schools back in 2013 had the effect of getting some people inspired within the public school system, seeing school choice on the horizon to improve what they were doing as well. And so there's lots of data out there to suggest that these programs work in states once they're well established. I want to say one more thing really quickly, because there's been a conversation about public funding going to private schools. Public funding, the point of it is to educate the child, right? The point of it is not a brick and mortar or anything like that. So if you look at like Pell Grants as an example, Pell Grants are public money that can be spent at private colleges. Nobody objects to that. We have a special needs ESA, dyslexia scholarship in Mississippi. Nobody really objects to that. Nobody objects to the fact that we spend public money on private vendors to build roads, because the idea is that we're spending public money for a public good. We just so happen to be using a private vendor in the middle of it. And so this is really no different when we're having this conversation. And the only thing that I would pose to the other side is, which kids do you want to kick off the special needs ESA first?
This notion that there are public dollars is always kind of intrigued me. It's as if that currency is like mark. It's like private, and then all of a sudden we send it to government, and it gets like embedded with some sort of inscription on it that says public. There's no such thing. Money is not fungible in that respect. And the idea that we would object to the use of any money that we send as private individuals and families to government to fund privately provided services would mean that the entire government would shut down. The largest employer in our state is Ingalls. Guess where their money comes from? The public. Comes from taxpayer dollars. About 10,000 employees down there. This is no different. Education is a service. It is a commodity, essentially, just like any other goods and services that government purchases using taxpayer-funded dollars that come out of private wallets. The situation with these voucher programs causing a decline or being linked to a decline to falling to test scores, I don't see how you measure that. Well, before the voucher program, these were the scores after. There are a myriad of factors that figure into our test scores. And I think we learned that during COVID quite a bit. That was exposed. The gloves were off for sure there. So I think this is just another one of those myths. My concern in the state of Mississippi, were we to implement robust school choice, is that the parents and the families that truly care about their children would figure out a way to leverage those programs to improve the education setting of their children. It's the ones that don't seem to be concerned. I think that's what happens a lot in these states, and thus the test scores decline. Education starts in the house.
I want to start off by saying I don't want the notion to be that we are against parents with kids with dyslexia or any other disability receiving any type of support to go to the school. So please don't put that on us, that we are against that. Definitely don't want that to be put. It's my time now. So in Tennessee, the Education Savings Account in Tennessee in 2018, after lawmakers narrowly passed the program as a pilot approach on vouchers, the new state audit conducted by the comptroller unfolded these findings. Voucher students' test scores remain below their public school peers and the statewide average. Students do better when they remain in public education. Example, neither Nashville voucher students nor Chattanooga voucher students' proficiency scores exceeded their public school peers in any year of the voucher program and ELA. Example two, ESA students in Nashville and Chattanooga score below their public school peers each year of the program in math.
So when national assessments were first administered, it's called the Nation's Report Card, a test that is given to children all across the country so we can see how states compare to one another in proficiency and student achievement. When those were first administered, which is like 30 years ago, Mississippi was way behind all the rest of the states. And it was largely because of Mississippi's pretty wretched past in refusing to educate all children well, our separate and unequal system of education. And over these 3 decades, Mississippi teachers have worked incredibly hard and done amazing work. And now Mississippi's 4th graders are ranked their scores are 9th in the country in reading and 16th in math, and Mississippi's public education system overall is ranked 16th in the country. It is pretty amazing stuff. And that happened in Mississippi without school choice. And here is the salient point in that. At the same time, particularly over the last decade, as these school choice programs began to grow in other states, as Mississippi was sailing past all these other states in student achievement, every single one of the states that is ranked a top 10 state for school choice was going backward on the very same assessments. And that includes Florida and Indiana and in all these school choice states. Every one of them went backward in student achievement as Mississippi was moving forward. Why would we adopt their failed programs when we are doing so much better?
All right, I'm gonna go off topic a little bit and say something in rebuttal to what Gerard said. I 100%, sir, agree with your last statement. Education begins in the home. 100%. I've heard Lindsay up here speak tonight about how she has 5 kids. Here's the issue, and I agree with what they said on this issue, okay? Here's the problem. The 5 kids that she has, they have 127 classmates, okay? 95% of those classmates, parents do not care. about what goes on with their child's education. They truly don't. I've been an educator. I've been a principal, public and private. They do not take that stuff as serious as the people that are in this room tonight. They have gone down the path of allowing an iPhone and an iPad to be the babysitters of these kids. That's where we've missed the boat. Sitting down, reading, working math, doing arithmetic at early ages to develop the skills for these kids to be successful is in the past. It's gone. It's not there any longer. Whether you're public or private, it doesn't matter. Education wholeheartedly starts in the home. And if you do not start it in the home, that child is going to be behind. It doesn't matter where you send them to school. And they leave it to the public schools and then later to the private and public, whatever the case may be, for the educators to figure it out. That's not fair. But I 100% agree with you on that statement, sir.
All right, so Jamie, you can hang on to the mic. Next question. Private schools can discriminate on religion, LGBTQ status, disability. Public schools cannot. Is this an acceptable disadvantage of choice, or does it mean taxpayer dollars fund exclusion forbidden in public systems?
So here's the statement you need to understand, okay? You do not choose private school. They choose you. When you walk up there to enroll, you have to be chosen to go to school there, okay? This is not a come on, get in free, pay the tuition, whatever. You have to go through certain parameters and guidelines to even be accepted, okay? So you don't choose the private school, they choose you. And is that fair? No, it's not fair. When you start using other people's dollars, and I don't want to get off on that again, but you know, when you go to a private school and they have the ability to discriminate based on who you worship, based on what you look like, what your parents do, you know, what kind of jeans you wear, you can't afford a school uniform, whatever the case may be, that's a problem.
Well, I think you make a really good point that the issue really is an unlevel playing field. I mean, who would create a state-funded education system with two different sets of schools, both funded with pretty much the same base student cost, but operating under completely different sets of rules? I mean, if you were going to create this system from scratch, would you really create that kind of system where you have this one set of schools that, first of all, is open to every child, but also is prohibited by law from charging tuition of the students who live within the district? And so they are limited in the amount of funding that they can have to what the government provides them. But then they are held to all these very rigorous academic standards. They must provide special education accommodations. They must provide transportation. There are all these rules and regulations. On the other hand, you've got this, you want this other set of schools, private schools, that you want to be funded with the same money. But they get to pick and choose their students. They have not a single one of the obligations that public schools have. And in addition to the state funding they get, they can raise as much money as they want to. I mean, that's not a competition. That's a rigged system that favors private schools. So let's have a level playing field where everybody operates under the very same set of rules, and children and parents really have the choice. All the schools are open to all the children.
I think they have addressed my concern or my question, but I would say something personally. A few years ago, when I was principal in Starkville, as it relates to the parents coming in and making a choice, there was a textbook that was being taught, and there were a couple of parents who did not approve of that textbook being taught while their child was in that school. So as principal, I made the decision to go in and have the conversation with that teacher, and that teacher had to come up with an alternative text or alternative assignment for that student to complete. So that's addressing those parents who had concerns about the particular textbook that was being taught.
I believe that a private entity has the right to do business with whomever they want at whatever price they can negotiate under whatever terms and conditions can be agreed to by the selling party and the buying party. That's the fundamental system we have in this country. So if a private school wants to set up some sort of guidelines and restrictions and rules about who they admit, I believe they are within their right. I think the concern comes in when so-called public dollars, whatever that is, are somehow appropriated and allocated by the people we elect. It's their responsibility. Once I take it out of my pocket and send it to the state capitol, they then determine how to spend that money, and I rely on them to do that. We vote for those people. So the only objection I can see here is that nobody likely on the other side would object to a private individual that chooses to spend their own money out of their pocket on a school that perhaps has some sort of rules that does not admit people in certain statuses. It's when it crosses the line and gets sent down to Jackson, that's when they have an issue with it. And all school choice does is put that control in the hands of parents and families, as opposed to the legislators in the House, legislators in the Senate, and then the lieutenant governor, and ultimately the governor. And who also, by the way, the speaker, the governor, the lieutenant governor, appoint those that sit on the school board that also promulgate lots of those policies. So I don't really have an issue with this. This is just allowing people to make a choice.
So I'd push back on the question a little bit because there is still something called public accommodation law in this country, and a private school can't discriminate on certain basis that the Supreme Court said you can't discriminate on. Now, what the Supreme Court has said in Carson v. Macon in the Espinoza case from 2020, 2022, was that you can give parents ESAs, and then the parents elect whether or not their kids go to a religious private school. They get to make that choice. And so I would flip this a little bit and say there's actually an opportunity here, right? A lot of parents are concerned, maybe not just in Mississippi, but across the country, about what's being taught in public schools, not necessarily the reading and the writing, it's all the other stuff. And it's the values that are being imposed upon their kids. And maybe they've got their own moral code that they want their kid to be brought up in. ESAs give an opportunity, not just to the wealthy to take advantage of that, to parents who maybe couldn't otherwise afford it to take advantage of that. And I would just remind everybody again that the average cost of tuition to private schools in Mississippi is beneath the amount that the ESA was going to cover. So this notion that it's just for a certain group of people, or that the goal here is to cream skim, one, that's not been the experience in robust states like Florida, but two, the fact is that these private schools in Mississippi very much want to take new kids. There is capacity there for that.
School choice or education freedom is not just handing unchecked power over to private schools. Again, you have to be accountable to the parents. The free market works. We know this. We've seen this time and time again. Private schools must compete for their students. And if they're not doing their job, then parents have the right to remove that child from that private school and choose another school. And if that happens enough times, then that school is going to be shut down. So we're not just giving private schools all the power, we're giving the power back to the parents where it was intended to be, where it belongs. It is time to fund students, not systems, not bureaucrats.
Let's be honest about our current system. Public schools do not accept all students universally. They only accept students according to boundaries and zip codes. You have private schools like Magnolia Speech, Canopy, Knox Academy, Bio Academy, that are accepting students every day with special needs, learning deficiencies, gaps in their education. So to say that private schools pick and choose, it's private schools' choice, not parents' choice, that's false. Because our public sector chooses right now.
All right, so you can hang on to the mic. Proponents say competition makes public schools better. Point to your single strongest evidence that public schools' performance rises due to choice, or any data that doesn't support it.
national organization, Edge Choice, has done over 200 empirical studies on how school choice benefits the public sector. You can go to edgechoice.org and check out their data. 200 empirical studies. Guys, I don't know if there's any other fact that's been researched as much as the benefits of school choice. So it works.
Yeah, and speaking of those Ed Choice studies, again, over 200 studies, and test scores, 13 points higher, graduation rates, 6 points higher, improvement with nearby public schools, 27 points higher, parent satisfaction, 31 points higher, fiscal effectiveness, 73 points higher, civic outcomes, 6 points higher, segregation, 4 points higher. So again and again and again, study after study after study, again, that was over 200 studies that were looked at. We see that school choice works. More freedom and more opportunity offered to parents for their children who they best know how to meet their needs results in better outcomes. And you know what that means? That means it's better for the state. That means less crime. That means more economics coming into our state. It's a win-win all the way around.
Yeah, they more than adequately addressed the question. I want to go back to the previous question for a second. I think certainly if you graduated from a private academy in the 1960s or 1970s, they probably were discriminating. There probably was an element of trying to keep certain people out. I don't think that's the experience in 2026. In fact, I know that by looking at some of MAI's data on the diversity of their schools. So I just wanted to push back briefly on that thought process. The other thing I wanted to introduce was something that Leah alluded to that I think is important, which is there are different kinds of school choice, right? There is the kind of school choice that we're talking about with ESAs, where you allow public money to go to a family that then elects where to send their kid. There's public to public, what they call portability school choice, that allows kids to move from district to district. There are charter schools, tax credits, all sorts of things. I want to apologize to Darren earlier to the extent it sounded like I was imputing to you the idea that you would personally not support the special needs ESA. But there is a group represented on the dais that didn't support charter schools, that didn't support the Literacy-Based Promotion Act, that didn't support special needs ESAs, that fought the new education funding formula when it was first introduced. And so I think on those things, it's very important to understand where people are coming from on these issues.
I think we should recognize that the state of Mississippi has certainly made monumental progress in public school education. We talked about that on both sides here tonight, and those accomplishments have been noticed nationwide. And we certainly should be proud of that, but it was in no small part to the effort of all the stakeholders involved. Our lawmakers, our parents and families, the students, the administration, teachers, everyone involved. And if I left somebody out, I apologize for that, but certainly it does take a lot of people from a variety of disciplines to achieve those kinds of goals. But what I've heard from my friends on the other side tonight, I would say to a great extent dismisses major concerns about implementing school choice. That there's no transportation, there's no private schools, that schools are full, that the outcomes are bad, that it's failed everywhere else. Why in the world would anyone want to move their school from the government, or their child, from their government assigned school? It's utopia. It's all perfect. The truth is, statistics show that the primary reason that a family opts for an education savings account in a different setting than the one the government compels them to participate in is because of behavioral problems, bullying. You can't learn in that environment. Those children, as Russ said, we need to save them if we can and get them to an environment so that they can succeed as an adult. And there's a short window of time to achieve that.
I guess I'll just reiterate that I'm a huge proponent of parents having a choice to send their child wherever they so desire to send their child. I just want to make sure that is clear. Also, thank you for your apology, because I did to kind of take that personally. But as it relates to competition, and I think it was just said a minute ago that private schools, they compete good, they should compete. Public schools just do not have that option. But just a real quick story. So we're asking public schools who have no authority to turn students away to compete with private schools who pick and choose. During my time at Starkville, and specifically while I was the principal, we had a blind student for which we had to hire an educator who knew Braille in order for the student to be successful. We had a deaf student where we had to hire an educator who could sign, even though the student couldn't sign. We had a student born with spina bifida, and upon his arrival to the high school, I had to transform one of the teacher restrooms to accommodate his needs through the day with a lift. And I must say, theater troupe at Starkville, where in addition, we've had multiple wheelchair-bound students. So again, we are asking public schools to compete where private schools would have never.
Well, the notion of competition assumes that all contestants are playing by the same rules. And that's just not the case with school choice. We've already been over that. I won't wear that out. But it's not really a fair competition. And somebody on the other side mentioned the free market. The free market also assumes that everybody is playing under the same rules, that there's no scale